Good evening. Welcome. This is going to be a very informative and fun class. This is one of the classes that I believe that you will learn at least one new thing that you might be able to use in parties and other gatherings, because there are many interesting facts about wine in Jewish tradition and in general. So where do you think, how many years ago we have at least an evidence for the first wine? So the archaeologists found the oldest wine that was found was from 6,000 BCE. Okay, so it's about 8,000, more than 8,000 year old. Very likely people started to make wine even before, or at least drink wine, even if they didn't know that they were drinking wine. Because think about it, you squeeze grapes and a very short time later, they start to ferment. There is natural yeast on the grapes. I'll tell it to you now. Okay, so wine naturally happens. When do you think they started to have grape juice? Only in 1869. Okay, very recently. They didn't know how to stop the fermentation. And it was, I'll tell you the name, and you said, wow, Dr. Thomas Welsh. He didn't make the money. He was the chemist. His son was the money genius. He was a religious Christian who didn't want to have wine for different reasons, and there was no alternative. So he found a way as a chemist to stop the fermentation of grape juice. Basically, boil the bottles, make sure that there was nothing to ferment them. And that was his solution, and Jews loved it, of course. Because what is the blessing for wine? It's Baruch Atah Adonai, Borei Pri Hagafen, creator of the fruit of the vine. The fruit of the vine is grape. It's not wine. We don't have a specific blessing for wine. So grape juice, okay, is wine. You don't need alcohol. And so that's why many people use it. And recently I've done a few weddings in which they asked me to specifically say grape juice, because one of the couples is not supposed to drink and didn't want the family and the friends to think that he is off the wagon. No, it's a serious issue. You tell everyone that you're an alcoholic and then you drink and people start to freak out. So they asked me to specifically mention that it's grape juice. Okay, so wine has been there for a long time. In Israel, only last year, they found a bottle from 5,000 BCE. Okay, a wine from 5,000, and they found the gut. It was the surface upon which they made the wine. But in the Bible, who was the first one to have wine? Noah. Noah. Remember Noah and the ark? We all know the story about the animals, the whole thing, the flood. When the flood was over and Noah, for the first time, was finally able to get out of the ark, what was the first thing he did? He planted vineyards. Now, the truth is that when you do the research, you have to wait about 5 years. So it's not that you plant it and 3 months later you have... but he planted vineyards and then he had wine. And this is one of the stories in the Torah and in the Bible in which wine is both good and bad. Because when you have enough, I hate the word in moderation, everyone uses it, overuses it, but when you don't drink too much, it's good. When you drink too much, as it happened to Noah, it's not very good. Okay, so he is credited to be the first human to have wine in the Torah. But the first one, as I said, the bottle was from Georgia, from 6000 BCE. And then the next one is from Armenia. And now we found it in Israel in Tel Megiddo. So this is just the beginning of wine in the Jewish tradition. Any questions, any comments about wine? Okay. Now, when you think about good wine today, what places you think about? Especially old country, old world. France, Italy, Spain, right? More or less. Portugal too, but that's... Germany is very specific kind of wine. Yeah, it's the Riesling country. But normally when we think about, when you go to Total Wine, you have tons of wine from Italy, tons of wine from France, a lot from Spain. If you look carefully, and I do, because I do appreciate the wines from Germany and Austria, you find a few bottles here and there. But for the most part, now in ancient times, the best wine, believe it or not, came from the Middle East. And special bottles came from the desert, from the Judean desert and from Gaza. Now, when we first learned about it, come on, Gaza, it's a desert. Who can have good grapes there? Apparently now the best wine in Israel comes from that area, from the Judean hills, from the desert. It's super dry, but for some reason has amazing wine. Okay, so it's a lot of trivia today. The ancient economy of the middle of the ancient Near East, wine was really important. In addition to wine, we also had grain. And what else do you think? It's the same today when you think about Italy and Spain. Olive oil. Okay, olive oil was really important because people use it not only for salad, but they use it for, we mentioned it in previous classes, light. You needed the olive oil for light, and they didn't have tons of oils back then. Oil meant olive oil. Okay, they couldn't use sunflower for oil. They didn't have the technology, but olives were very easy to use for. Okay, that was the economy, and wine was huge. But the first real usage of wine that we know when it comes to the legal aspect of the Bible comes from the book of Leviticus that describes the sacrificial system. You know, back then when people wanted to worship God, they didn't pray, they didn't go to a synagogue, they went to the shrine, to the temple, in order to offer food to God. The main kind of food were animals, because meat was considered the best, definitely the most expensive kind of food. And if you wanted God to be happy with you, you would give God the best you have. So they sacrificed animals on a regular basis. The best one was, any guesses? Ox. Yeah, think about ox is the biggest, the most expensive thing. A lamb, even if the best lamb is still small. Ox, not only that it's huge, also people use it for agriculture. To plow the fields, people used oxen. Okay, so to give up an ox to God was a huge deal. Lamb was good, but not as good as an ox. Okay, oxen were, and during special holidays, of course, they had to sacrifice the oxen or the bulls, for those of you who really care about the difference. But with the meat, as they were sacrificed, you first slaughter the animal, then you burn it. That was the idea. Why do you burn the meat? Because the smoke goes up. And who is up? God. Because that's the only way to deliver the wonderful meat to God. You cannot take a piece of filet mignon and throw it up in the air. Hey, God, catch it. Oh, sorry, God, you missed it. I can eat it now. That was not the system. But, they didn't have the term gravity, but they knew that everything that goes up eventually goes down except of smoke. So you burn the meat, the smoke goes up, and the biblical phrase for that is, it's a pleasing smell to the Lord. Okay, God is so happy. God inhales the smoke of the burnt meat and nourishes himself. And it's not only the Jews. If you read some about Greek mythology and others, that's what they did. They had to feed the gods. And ancient Israel was not so different, at least in the beginning. Later on, some people in the Middle Ages said, that's crazy. Of course, we know that God doesn't need food and the whole thing. And the answer that Maimonides gave, that was, I think, still the best that I read, was that's what people knew. And to tell them, don't do it, when everyone else is doing it, you rob them of a way that for them was the authentic way to worship God. So the Torah knew that God doesn't need your burnt meat, but that's what people associated with worshiping God, giving God the best they had. Now, meat is a substance. That's the earthly thing. Wine in the Jewish tradition is the soulful thing, is the spiritual thing, because when you drink wine, you become more joyous. Wine has always been associated with joy. So you give God meat and joy. Okay? So we use the word libation. We still use it sometimes in a funny way, but you pour. Libation normally or originally the word uses for sacrificial or for sacramental purposes. So you pour some of the wine on the altar along with the meat, and God inhales it both and is happy with you, and you will give you 11 kids and 2 new baby cows. No, that's mostly what people, yeah, go ahead. So Bruce is asking always no, this is a great question. That's a very important question. Who ate the ox? Okay, just to put everything in perspective, no refrigeration. So today, if you want to have a burger, you go to the store and you buy some meat and you grind it and you make a burger. Back then, if you wanted a burger, you had to kill a cow or an ox, right? Who ate it? It's not so simple. You'll never give a right answer when you ask about Judaism, because the answer is always depends. There are different levels of sacrifices. The best sacrifice is when the entire animal is burnt. Everything is burnt. Okay, take the entire ox, you have to slice it. You cannot put the whole ox on the altar. Okay, so you chop it, you slice it, the book of Leviticus. If you're into it, open the book of Leviticus, get all the gory details of doing it. You burn it all. That was the most precious one because nobody benefited it, only for God. The word, if you go to older, pre-19, let's say 45 Bibles, the name for the all burnt sacrifice is Holocaust. Yeah, read old translations, it's always the Holocaust. And that's where the word came from. All burnt, okay, everything. Yeah, so it's fascinating how words change meaning, right? So you read it in the beginning, yeah, that was the sacrifice because the entire animal was burnt. Now, of course, we cannot use it this way. There are many words that when you read in older translations, you cannot use anymore for different reasons. So that was the all burnt sacrifice. But most of the others sacrifices, it was the priest got a nice piece as payment, because only priests were allowed to sacrifice. We couldn't just go and sacrifice our own animal. You had to take it to the altar, to the priest. Originally, there were many different shrines, but later on, there was only one central place in Jerusalem. Okay, but it had to be done by the priest. The priest took his portion, always a man, and the donor, that's how they call the person who brings the animal, took their own portion. That was in some periods the only way to eat meat, because you couldn't slaughter an animal yourself. So the only way to eat meat was to take it to the temple. The priest would sacrifice it on your behalf. The priest would take a piece, you will get a piece, and who else is getting a piece? God. But we can smile or even laugh, but think how powerful it was for people who thought that they are having dinner with the priest and God. This is great. Okay, so it's hard for us really to fully understand it, especially when the theology changed so much and we look at God as God without any needs, any body, anything. But back then they really believed that they feed God. So God is having dinner with them. Now, probably over 90% of the people of Israel never ate meat. Who could afford it? Okay. They couldn't do it. It was extremely rare for them to have at least beef. You could get a pigeon here and there or something like that if you were lucky, but to have beef, it was rare. So there are beautiful stories in the Bible. I think my favorite is in 1 Samuel. Samuel's mother couldn't, before she was his mother, couldn't have children. And the father had more than one wife who had tons of children. So at one point they went to they were wealthy. So in one of the festivals they went to to Shiloh. That's where the temple was before Jerusalem, and they sacrificed. And she was praying, but she was praying only with her lips. She didn't voice her prayers. The priest thought that she was drunk because she saw a person talking to herself. You know, today it's normal because you think that they have earphones inside and they talk to someone. But 3,200 years ago, no. And he yelled at her. He said, "You drunken woman, just remove the wine from me." And she said, "I'm not drunk. I'm talking to God." And he didn't apologize enough. But 9 months later, she had a baby. Okay. Not some of, okay, I have to repeat the questions for people who watch us from on Zoom. The question is, if some of the sacrifices have to be unblemished, the answer is all sacrifices must be unblemished. Even a tiny blemish renders them not kosher, not appropriate to be sacrificed, because who receives it? God. You cannot give God something that is not perfect. That's the reason, by the way, not only the sacrifices, the animals had to be perfect, but the priest had to be perfect physically. I know today we find it insensitive and insulting. We understand better, but no, if a priest is not physically perfect, if he has, I don't know, one leg that is shorter, and there are all descriptions. No, because everyone who serves God had to be perfect. Everything that goes to God must be perfect. Okay, that was the idea. So at the temple time, wine was served as a libation, and the way they made it is not different than the way they made it until quite recently. How did they squeeze the juice out of the grapes? Feet. They didn't jump, they walked, because the worst thing would be to crush the seeds. The seeds are bitter. You don't want bitter seeds in your wine, and you don't want tiny pieces of seeds in your wine. So the feet are just right. They put enough pressure, but not too much to crush the seeds. Okay? So they had a large floor like that, and people would just walk on these feet, hopefully washing their feet before. It was less of a concern back then. And then all the Jews went down, and naturally it fermented. People drank a lot of wine back then, a lot. What do you think is the main reason? Not just disgusting, could kill you easily. It was very rare. Yeah. If we don't get water from our tap, I mean, you cannot just go to the river and drink water unless you know how to use different filters and chemicals, and that there is a way to do it, to purify water. It was dangerous. So people drank a lot of wine and beer, tons of beer. In Egypt, archaeologists found next to every bakery, there was a brewery, because they used the same yeast, okay? That for the baking, it was not yeast, basically. It was what you're going to have tomorrow, Bruce. It was the starter for the sourdough, okay? So they use the same thing that causes either the bread to rise or the wine to, or the beer, the grains to ferment. And for the grapes, it was natural. Okay, so just squeeze it, and very quickly it starts to ferment, and you get your wine. Later on, especially in the time of the Mishnah, they talked about, but probably people did it before. They didn't drink the wine pure the way we do it now. They mixed it with water. And the Mishnah is talking about the ratio. So the ratio was 1 to 3, 1 portion of wine to 3 portions of water. Why did they do it? Sorry? Last longer, less strong, because it's not only adults, kids drank as well. They didn't think about it. They couldn't afford more than that. And to your question, but still they used water. The explanation is that 1 to 3, there is enough alcohol in the wine to kill the germs in this kind of a ratio. I didn't check it chemically, I don't know, but it worked, or at least that was the wisdom back then. Okay, so still the word in modern Hebrew, which I didn't know until really a few years ago. So when you pour anything, there is a word, limzog. Most people don't use it. But when you learn it, limzog means to mix, not to pour in biblical Hebrew. Because for them, wine was to mix it with water, just the way you make a cocktail, okay? You just take alcohol and mix it with something. So to drink wine, you needed the wine and you mixed it. You didn't just serve it neat. That was not the way to do it. I thought you might find it. They used wine skins, yes, and clay bottles. They didn't have glass at that time. But mostly what we find, the archaeologists find, is mostly skin. It was better, and this clay, but they did use clay too. Yes, because there are nice stories in the Mishnah when you're mentioning. There is a story about a daughter of a Roman nobleman who who ridiculed the Jews for doing something, I don't know. So he went to that person, say, no, we're not fancy, but you keep all your wine in clay bottles. Why don't you keep them in gold ones? Because you're so fancy. So the daughter went and poured all the good wine into gold, and of course it turned very quickly. And he said that good stuff can be stored in clay, even in ugly vessels. And that's a little story, but that teaches us that at one point they shifted from skin to clay, but that was the. Any comments, questions so far? Okay, moving along. Kosher wine. The Torah doesn't say anything about kosher wine. There isn't really such a thing as kosher wine. There is a law. Actually, there were two laws. That a Jew is not allowed to sell wine to an idol worshiper, because the idol worshiper will use the wine as libation to worship idols. Okay, so one of the prohibitions was not only that you're not allowed to worship idols, you're not allowed to assist anyone to worship idols. Okay, so if you sell them or give them wine, or if you use their wine, it's wine that is connected to idolatry, which back then was the biggest sin ever. Okay, worshiping idols was the worst ever. Okay, so you couldn't do it. And that started the whole idea of don't buy wine from somebody who worships idols, developed into don't buy wine from a non-Jew, developed into don't buy wine from a Jew who does not observe all the commandments. So kosher wine, when you pay the extra for the kosher, what it says is that a Gentile did not touch the wine before it was bottled. And that really bothers me, because I immediately thought about a law. If we hear that there is a law, that if a Jew touches something, it becomes forbidden to be used, the ADL and all of us will be yelling and screaming. But that's what we are doing. Most people don't know. They think that there is a way really to make kosher wine. No, all it means is that a Gentile has not touched it. It was not blessed by anyone. No, that's the nonsense that people say. No, it's not. And it wasn't a big deal until it became a huge industry. Now, let me add something that I will mention more in 2 weeks when we talk about bread. But there was the same thing about bread, because bread is such an important thing in Judaism, right? So why can't we drink wine that the Gentile touches, but we can eat bread that the Gentile made? Okay, and idol worshippers used bread as well. So the truth is that there was prohibition initially to use bread that was touched or made by Gentiles. Just like the wine, why did they stop it? Why you never heard of it? They couldn't get bread. You can live without wine, you can get different things, but bread is something you need every day. And people ate bread all the time. Today there was no gluten-free or no carbs or no things like that. 95% probably of what you ate was bread. I grew up having bread, breakfast, lunch, dinner. There was always a bread basket, no matter what. That was the main thing on the table. Okay, but bread was made by others, especially when they started to have bakeries. So it was just impossible. And so they canceled the law about bread, and none of you has ever heard about it. But wine stayed and turned into a huge industry. So yeah, I will not avoid wine because it's kosher, but I would never go out of my way to get kosher wine, because I really think that, I won't call it racist, but it definitely has some things that it's time to change, especially since we know how wine is made today. It's all automated and nobody is worshiping idols anymore. I don't know, maybe you have friends who worship idols. Kosher is multi-billion-dollar industry, and that's what's happening, really. I have a friend, in Israel who bought a little vineyard in Italy just for inexpensive wine. And in order to make the wine kosher, so he had two lines. All he had to do was to pay another $1 or something like that. Exactly the same wine, exactly everything, but he had to pay for the K or the U, whatever he got back then. Another $1, 75 cents, whatever was the number back then. That's why I didn't make the entire wine kosher. Same process, just you hire a person there who say, okay, it's all good. No, it's not. It just, but it's a huge industry. And so that's the story about kosher wine. But that's just the beginning. That's a legal thing. I'll talk more about it. That will lead us, Paul. Azel bezach. You know what it means in Yiddish? Same thing. You can buy kosher for Passover water, soap, shampoo, dish, everything. It's a business. It's a multi-billion. Can you check how many billions of an industry it is? Oh, and that, you know, your cost for that. I'm not saying that kosher is all fake. And I kept kosher for now less than half of my life. I'm getting older, but for not all is fake, but a lot is getting out of control because of the business component. $12 billion with a B. Okay, you understand? Water, I mean, because it's not because of the Jews, it's because many people associate kosher with better quality, with cleaner products, which is not the case at all. Kosher lettuce is a huge deal. Oh, there is a big fight in Israel now, kosher lettuce. So the Torah says don't eat insects, which is probably good advice for the most part, if we can avoid insects. And many of us wash our vegetables, I hope, before we eat, not only for insects. Actually, today it's for more dangerous things than insects, right? All these chemicals that they use. But so some people in Israel started an extra layer of kosher, selling lettuce that was checked under a microscope. Yes, you can pay for lettuce more than you would pay for a nice piece of prime meat. It's out of control. And people fall for it. Again, please don't think that I'm against kosher. If you keep kosher, by all means, keep kosher, but use your judgment, because you don't need kosher soap, you don't need kosher water. And wine, I explained to you why it is. And think about bread, which is really the most fundamental. The blessing we say for food. What is the general blessing for food? Hamotzi lechem. Lechem is bread. There's no kosher bread. Okay, did you think about it? Because it's just too hard to have kosher bread, because you want good bread from good bakeries and we want to buy it in the supermarket. So, but I don't mind. You want to pay extra for things, do. But I mentioned it specifically about wine because it's not about dietary laws. It's about who touched it. And I understand the origin of it, I told you, because you don't want to have wine that was used for idol worshiping. But we are thousands of years after that, and it really sounds bad. Paul, you wanted to ask me something? Kind of begs the question, what do people eat as a regular diet? You know they have wine, you know they have protein. So Paul is asking, what did they have? They had vegetables. They had mostly grains. Protein rarely came from animals. They had fish, which was easier and cheaper. Dove. You can have pigeons or doves. I don't remember the difference, but they are kosher, believe it or not. Grasshoppers are kosher. And yeah, at one point we'll start eating them because we'll need it. Probably it's better for you than other things. Yemenite Jews ate it a lot because over there they didn't have access to meat the way we have it, and they needed some protein. Very little protein. Yeah, mostly grain and vegetables, whatever they could get. This is the first time in history that people go to the gym to burn calories. For most of history, until recently, people could not afford enough calories. And they burn all the calories just by working and walking. Okay, they didn't drive and sat in a chair in an office. They never had, the vast majority of the people never had enough calories. That's why all the new generations are much bigger and taller, and okay, because for the first time they have enough nourishment. They tried it I saw a documentary a few years ago. They went to a village in Mexico. I don't know if anyone watched it. And many, many years ago, and took a small group of babies and just fed them differently from the rest of the village in Mexico. And then as they were growing, they gave them different food. And they became the giants of the village. And they showed that this is not genetics, or not only genetics, it's nutrition. Because the people were very short in that area because they ate mostly corn and whatever they had, but had no access to enough protein. And that's why they didn't really grow. You gave them the right kind of food, they grew, yeah, they shot. But that's okay. So that was a good question. So that's what they ate a lot. And think about when they talk about the Mediterranean diet. Every day I read about it in the papers. That's the best way. It doesn't have a lot of meat, right? It's grains, it's olive oil, it's cheese, right? And everything nuts, everything all grain, that's, and vegetables. That's what they ate, and that's, let's move a little bit. Oh, we have a short, okay. I'll think.
Versus bread is because the wine was for the soul.
So the question is, why kosher wine remain? Because it's more associated with soul and bread more with the body. What scholars believe, and I think it's true, the rules for wine and bread meant to separate Jews from non-Jews. Because when we go somewhere, we eat and we drink. If you cannot eat and drink with somebody, the odds that you will be friends or that you will socialize often are very slim. Okay, so if a Gentile touches your wine or your bread, oops, it's not kosher anymore. Okay, you're not going to interact with them. You don't say it explicitly, but that was the real reason behind it. Okay. And then the bread just for reasons of convenience, and wine remain, and I think it's huge because of the industry. So let's talk a little bit more about the Jewish wine, okay? It's not just kosher, it's so you associate, and that's what we're going to play with a little bit, kosher wine with the sweet wine, right? The Manischewitz and others were going. But this thing started in the 1880s in America, out of necessity. Jews were mostly poor, especially the Jews who came from Eastern Europe to New York, upstate New York. The cheapest grapes are the Concord grapes. I tasted them. They're disgusting. They're sour. No, really, it's not, unless you love this kind of thing. They couldn't go to California to buy the expensive Cabernet, okay? They didn't even care about it. They had the extremely cheap, sour Concord grapes. That's what they used. Nobody wanted to drink it. What do? You add an insane amount of sugar. Okay? That's how it started. That's why, out of necessity, not because it has anything to do with Judaism or with kosher. Okay, it was the cheapest way to make wine. That's how the Jews started. Okay, so today, even if you're into kosher stuff, you don't have to have this kind of wine. We are going to enjoy it today, but just because it's funny. So one of the first Seder, maybe the first one that I hosted in my house in America, I had good wines, or at least what I considered back then to be good. I enjoy wine. And many people said, where's the Manischewitz? I said, are you crazy? I really thought it was a joke. And then I realized that many people, when it comes to Passover, that's the taste of wine of their grandmother, and Passover without the Manischewitz is not Passover. Why? I believe in alcohol, and I prefer the liqueurs that are, we use the Vishniak or the some cherry stuff, but you can use it for, no, we prefer stronger stuff. But but many people like it, and it's absolutely true, because some flavors, even though you became super foodie, but there's few flavors, it's low quality stuff, and you love it because the brain associates it with some happy time of your life, and that's why you eat it, not because it's good. It's bad, but you still eat it. And when you think, do you have anything like that you can get much better quality stuff, but you still go for the low quality, not because you're cheap, not because you're not sophisticated enough, but because the brain creates this this connection to past memories? I can tell you that when my kids came back for the first time from Halloween with all the stuff, that was my first exposure to the traditional American things, right? Snickers and whatever people eat. I tried them all. They're disgusting. But I understand why people love them, because they had them as children. For the first time I had it, I was 30 something, and I love dark chocolate. So you get these things. Yeah, it's so sweet. It's so why would anyone? But I understand why people love it. When I go to Israel, and I have the kind of bars that I had as a child, it's different. You wouldn't have them here, but it's the Israeli style of Kit Kat. It's not as good, but it's good, not because it's of the quality. It's still, okay, so that's, food creates different associations in our brain. Some are good, some are bad. Some of you would not touch certain food because of bad memories, or because you associated with some thing. So kosher wine, until quite recently, probably the 1980s, was associated with the Manischewitz and the Magen David and the whole other things, until a group of investors in Israel, in the Golan Heights, went to California, brought some experts, learned how to grow good grapes, mainly Cabernet, Merlot, Syrah they're trying with, and did it exactly the way they do it in Napa Valley. And the wine was quite good, okay? In my personal opinion, it's not Napa Cabernet, those of you like it, but it's good, and it tastes like Cabernet Sauvignon, not like Manischewitz. And when they started, and Israeli wine started to have some quality, there are more and more vineyards and wineries now in Israel all over. As I said, from the Dead Sea or the Judean desert to up north to the Galilee and the Golan Heights, different kinds of wines, different kinds of grapes. Some of them are very, very good. But once they come to America, they become quite expensive because of all the taxes. And in America, we have access to many other things. Go to Total Wine. I just went to check the other day. There are several shelves of kosher wine. Only few of them are the sweet Concord wine. The rest are good Israeli wine. Some of them go for over $100. So that's the next life of wines, of a kosher wine. Any questions or anything that, okay.
I will tell you that Shabbat makes wonderful sangria. You add fruit to the plain old Manischewitz and spritz some club soda. It's the best sangria you'll ever taste.
I will take your word for it. No, please. I don't like sweet stuff. So sangria, but it makes sense because the sugar is already built into the wine. Sangria, you cook wine and you add sugar. Manischewitz, you don't need to. Not every wine from Israel is kosher. Excellent question. Not everyone is kosher. And since you asked, you reminded me of something really important that I almost forgot. Another way to make kosher wine, to avoid the idea of a Gentile touching it, is to boil it. So boil, to bring it to around 180 degrees. Because once it's, don't drink it, Ken, it's not for you. Once it's almost boiled, according to halacha, to Jewish law, it is no longer considered wine. Even though it still has all the characteristics of wine and the alcohol, they don't let the alcohol evaporate or they add more. I don't really know how to do it. So if you look at the kosher wine, and there is a word there, mevushal, which means cooked or boiled, don't buy it. Unless you want to buy it. But okay, so that's another way to bypass the kosher.
Are there white kosher wines?
There are white kosher wines. We're going to have one today. Some of them are quite good, yes. What are we doing now? Oh, we're saying goodbye. We need to work on our sign language. So those of you on Zoom, unfortunately, we cannot share our wine and crackers and cheeses with you. So thank you for joining us. I hope that you learned something, at least one fact that you learned today. We're saying goodbye. And those of you who stay, we're going